Welcome to this episode of Talking Lamar. Today, I'm talking about what it was like back at school in the day when corporal punishment was not only allowed, it was encouraged. Let's get to it.
What are you talking about?
What are you talking about?
Sorry, I forgot what I was talking about.
What are you talking about?
I am talking to you.
That's just what I was talking about.
It's Talking Lamar.
You know, I am truly and fully aware of the time that we live in today and the fact that it is so very different than the 60s and the 70s. Today, discipline in school is very different. I'm not sure that we actually have what I consider discipline in school as much as we have negotiations. And I don't want to sound like the old guy in the neighborhood shaking my fist and screaming, "Get off of my lawn." But I do think that being a teacher now is way more challenging and difficult than it was back then. Now, I'm not going to call them the good old days because for me, every day, every decade, every period of time that I've ever lived in is the good old days. Maybe not at that very moment for me, but it is for somebody. And I can't wait for the next batch of good old days because I'm going to enjoy them too. I'm not trying to wave the flag, but I still maintain this is the greatest country in the world to live in. The opportunities are ridiculous. And this is me speaking for myself. But I lived in a single wide trailer, played in a dirt yard, and I grew up with an alcoholic daddy and still had the best time of my life. And growing up, I wouldn't have swapped it with anybody. People had it really tough back then, and they still have it tough now. It's just a different kind of tough with a different set of problems. And as far as school goes, teachers did the very best they could with what they had, and they did it according to what was normal in that day's society. The teachers today are doing exactly the same thing, the best they can with what they have, and they're doing it based on what is normal in this society. Now, in that day and time, right or wrong, I learned how to act, how to listen, how to follow instructions, and probably how to stay safe and not get hurt by being given choices and consequences by my mama. When I was given an instruction, I then had the option to make a decision. Either I chose to follow that instruction or to refuse it. If I followed it, all was right in the world. If I chose not to follow it, I would be reminded of the consequence and I would be given the option of re-examining my choice, fully knowing that the outcome would be with both. Now, there are plenty of times I chose not to go with the instruction just to see if there was a chance that it could work out for me and not to really have to face the consequence. Now, I'm not sure how that worked in y'all's house, but in my house, it never went my way. In the course of growing up with Doris Richardson, I have had a switch taken to my bare legs in the summertime after I was sent to break the switch off and bring it back. And the first time I brought back a green floppy switch about thick as a piece of angel hair pasta. Now, when my mama didn't take that and she went to get a replacement, it looked to me like she brought a tree limb back with her. So after that, if I was sent to get the switch, I made a very careful choice of something both she and I could both live with. And, there's always the option of running because it seemed like a good idea because I'm young, she's old, I can outrun her. I tried that once. She caught me way quicker than I expected. And it made her a whole lot madder. So, you got to weigh your options. When I was little, I think I remember this. I would get a couple of pops on my butt, and that would take care of business. And then when that stopped getting my attention, we moved to a belt. Now, when you double that belt in half, when you pop somebody on the butt with that, the first half makes contact, and the second half hits the first half of the belt, and it makes a popping sound. Now, it doesn't make it hurt any more or worse, but that sound of that pop, that resonates. It makes you remember that. And in my lifetime, I've probably had my jaws popped twice for back talking. It took 2 of those, and I learned never, ever did that again. Never said another cross word to my mama till the day she died. Now, before somebody picks up the phone and starts calling DSS, I was certainly not abused as a child. I was loved and cared for and fed way too much. And I learned where the boundaries were and why it was not a good idea to cross over them. And every person I knew throughout my childhood, they were raised exactly the same way. So it made perfect sense that when we were passed on to our teachers, to continue to get some instruction in life and to learn things and to maintain an orderly classroom so that everybody could learn, as students, we needed to find out where the boundaries were in school. So, what could we get away with? And what was the consequences if we bucked the system? And at that time, they had the permission to administer exactly the same consequences that we had at home. And I'm sure that made it a lot easier because I think the first grade was the only grade where you couldn't get paddled. I could be wrong. I just know I didn't get one in the first grade. So evidently you couldn't get one. If you could have got one, I'd have probably got one. I remember getting one in the second grade. And I don't know of a teacher that did not have a paddle in their room. Some kept them in a drawer. Others put them on display for effect. Sort of like you put a scarecrow out there to keep the crows away. If you hang a paddle up in the room, people pay attention to that, you know? Now, if we're trying to make a point to the class, I don't know if y'all had this, but sometimes they would pick up a paddle and walk around and talk, carrying it as a reminder that they wasn't putting up with no crap. And there were a couple of older woman teachers. They were older ladies, and they weren't built for whooping somebody. So that was really worse because if you needed that to happen, they wasn't going to do it, but they would either send you to the principal or they would get one of the male PE teachers to do it. And buddy, that is not what you want. Now, I don't know. How was it in the Catholic school? Because y'all went to Catholic school.
Yeah, those nuns were hardy stock. They didn't need some man to do it for them.
And they didn't need a paddle. They had their hands. They had extraordinary, like they were cage fighters.
Yeah.
So, I was such, I loved school. Like it was my favorite thing in the world. So I was seldom in trouble in school, but when my parents split up and my grandmother put me in Catholic school, I was 7th grade, which is a tough time to be alive.
Yeah.
And the rules in Catholic school, it's best to start really young because if you don't understand that when the nun calls on you and you look up and say, yeah, that's a beaten offense.
Yeah.
Right, Max?
I got a cold chill when you just said that.
Yeah. I had to learn, you know, the little tiny fine baby hairs right at your temple? Sister Mary of the Holy Child yanked me by those. I thought we were going to end up in Long Island before she was done. She yanked me so hard by those baby hairs that I never again made the mistake of saying, yeah, I understood that yes, sister was the correct response.
Yeah. Yeah.
But for the most part, like I was never hit as a child. My mother did not believe in it, and my father kept us in line with firearms. And so he beat the living snot out of my older brother. I mean, my older brother was brutalized, but I was not hit because my father didn't believe that you should hit a little girl. Now, draw down on her. Absolutely come in hot, but not with your hands. I was paddled in school once in Wyoming for the ghastly crime of not being able to do the math problem at the board. And not because I was insolent or being a dick. I no more understood what those markings on that board were than I would have if they were Sanskrit. I just did not understand. I stood there for the longest time and just couldn't do it. And the teacher, who was also the bishop of the local ward, this is Mormon country, he had a thing. I don't think he liked my father, whatever it was. I don't know. didn't like the look on my face, I got pounded with a paddle. I got the crap beaten out of me with a paddle. It's the only time in my life anyone's ever hit me. So I am not like, your childhood is idyllic. You're like a book, like a storybook, like a novel about an American boyhood in a specific time and place. And my husband grew up very similar. The phrase "go cut a switch" was something I'd only read in books until I met you and Kevin.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so I'm not, I don't know, but as you are raised, then you turn around, like I could never raise my hand to either one of my children, and I don't know what they would have had to do to merit it. Like, I mean, Max, you've been around Olivia and Karamia their whole entire lives.
Yeah.
What did they ever do?
Nothing. Nothing that was that kind of
A whooping offense.
A whooping offense.
Like,
and I'm not so sure that I did. I mean, they both did. I mean, both of my parents did. My favorite is when my brother and I always had identical clothes, and the big deal was, did you hang up your jacket? So my brother left his jacket on my bed. And so my father comes in, I've told you, blah, 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 blah. And he goes and he hits me a couple times on my bottom, and not hard. He didn't. And I said, that's Jerry's. And he looked in and he could see the marking inside. So my father takes his hand and puts it on my butt and he wipes it like, I'm going to get rid of this.
He's taking it back. He's taking it back.
I'm taking it back. All right. It was another time. My mother one time had decided she had had enough of me and she was going to hit me. I remember we were staying in a little cottage at the Jersey Shore, and it was a summertime, and she reared back to hit me, and she hit her thumb on the dresser, and she broke a bone in her thumb.
Oh.
And it was the last time, it really was the last time that she ever went to strike me as a child. And when I say strike me, it wasn't.
No, we know what you were getting a swat.
Exactly.
But I have to tell you that inside, I was kind of laughing, and my brother and I, we took great delight in the fact that she broke a bone in her thumb, rearing back to spank me.
Your mom was so like faithful. She probably took that as a punishment from God.
Sure. If she did, she certainly didn't say anything.
Well, she wouldn't.
She got
because
over
then
it.
you'd get the upper hand. Yeah.
Somebody asked me about this, and it was funny because we had the podcast where I was talking about my parents, and I said my mother was abusive. It wasn't physical. My mother's abuse was not physical abuse. I just wanted to be real clear about that. But but they did it when we were in Catholic school. They did it, and they would hit hands with rulers, and I don't ever remember any of it being terribly bad. But at the same time, at the time, it seemed appropriate, and I don't know whether it made any difference or not. But certainly now it seems wholly inappropriate, and I guess there's no part of me that thinks that should be appropriate. That's just my opinion about it.
Well, and that's my whole point about times. Times they all change. And my story that I'm telling here about being at school, I know it. This sounds like I'm reviewing a movie about medieval times where all throughout the school you could hear shrieks and screaming and moans and pains and homelessness. But the spanking thing, it did happen, but it rarely happened. And the reason I can say it rarely happened because in the school, when it did, it was a big deal. And if it was one of those next day sentences where you got, convicted
and then you got on extra.
Well, of course, we talked about this on the show. Yeah, if I knew I was getting a spanking the next day, I was putting him underwear on. I was sweating, man, because I might have like 5 or 6 pair of underwear on. But if there was no such thing as getting spanked in the room by your teacher, because the teacher wouldn't do it in front of the other students. They would take you out in the hallway, and then they would get another teacher to be the witness. And so everybody knew when it happened. And if it turned out to be one of those, when you get here tomorrow, you're going to get a spanking, listen, by that afternoon, when you got the sentence, I mean, you were legendary. And when everybody's just like, oh my God, man, you're going to get, and everybody's like all excited and whatever. And then when you come in the next day, it was like you was walking the Green Mile. It was very solemn. And all the people, they couldn't make eye contact with the condemned. Okay. You'd be all the people that was talking to you the day before, they don't even know who you are. The day before you were a hero because this is what was going to happen. But now you're going exactly where no one wants to go. And they don't want me to be reminded that it's possible it could happen to them. And they're thinking, oh my gosh, if some legends are true, he might not be coming back from this. And back then, if there had been an internet when I was in school, this would have been going viral. It would be everywhere. But there was the telephone, but it was at home. And that's where everybody could hear you because it was in a room where the living room was or whatever. And instead of texting a few cool words to one of your buddies and hoping it to be reposted, and at the same time, you could also say something really mean and make somebody, seem like they were less and you were somehow superior. Doing that with text or something, you couldn't. You'd have to pick up the phone and dial the number. You would have to listen to it ring. And then if somebody answers, oh my gosh, now you have to have a conversation with somebody. And back then, that was the only way to communicate. We enjoyed calling somebody on the phone and talking to them. Now it's text. It's not just text with young people. It's text with adults. Max, you and I communicate quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
How often do we actually make a phone call with each other?
Very rarely.
Yeah. And I would say 10 years ago, you and I stayed on the phone all the time. We talked all the time. We talked all the time.
Yeah.
So that's the way it is now. And this is not one of those get off my lawn things because I'm as addicted to the phone as anybody can be. And the modern cell phone, honestly, is probably one of the best things to ever happen to this world. But like a lot of those best things, it's also the absolute worst because there's two sides to everything and it depends on how you use it. But then here we go. The next day you go from hero to goat. Nobody's talking to you. Nobody's looking at you. Nobody wanted to be associated with this guilty person headed for purgatory. But then you get in your classes. Nothing's happened so far. Nobody said anything, but nobody acts like you're there. And so you feel like everybody can sort of smell the desperation and the fear and the regret. And then maybe you make it past lunch. You know it's coming, but when's it coming? You look at the clock, but that would be crazy because don't you see the clock means nothing. The executioner does not set a schedule. They wait, and they wait to see when the feel of the enormity of your situation, of the sin that you committed, and you've had all day to ruminate about it, and you realize where you went wrong, and then when you least expect it, a teacher, if it's a teacher that's going to give you the paddling, she comes to your room, they knock on the door, and she goes, "Can I see Lamar out in the hall?" Or if, and this very rarely happens, the principal calls you over the intercom system.
Oh.
Mr. Jones, can you send Lamar to the office? And boy, everybody, all eyes would turn on you. Because listen, the principal, he don't get his hands dirty unless this has been multiple problems or what you did was so heinous that only he could be the final judge and jury. And if he couldn't settle it, then it was suspension or you was going to jail. The police was going to pick you up.
Yeah.
And all of that happened. But that was a different time. And it worked well. It worked very well back then. But this is a very, very different time. And it would not work now. It's just, no, it's not. And so when we look back at it, we have to realize the times. And back then, we didn't have a care in the world. As students, we went to school, we came home, we played outside. Parents didn't know where we were. There were no worries about somebody grabbing a kid. Why would somebody grab one? The actual parents only wanted them part-time. Nobody ever got shot in school. We didn't have to worry. There's no such thing as a school shooter. It's not that. When we were in school, listen, if you had a school shooter when we were in school, the police would not have gotten there before every 15-year-old boy that had his learner's license and drove a pickup truck had a rifle hanging in the back of the window. Hell, they would hunt the guy down. I mean, they were, don't get me wrong. There's bullying at school now. There were bullies back then. But when you were a bully back then, that was hard work because you couldn't just sit in a room and get on the computer and say horrible things and make somebody feel terrible about themselves, without having to look them in the eye. If you were a school bully, you had to put some work into it because you can't be a bully if people are not scared of you. You have to build a reputation. That takes work. That takes getting in fights and all kinds of stuff. And then, even if you're a successful bully, you got to be sure not to pick on the wrong one because maybe he just don't put up with your crap and he whoops your ass. It's different now. People can be drove to suicide just by people saying horrible things on the internet. It's a different childhood now.
Well,
different,
for kids,
completely different.
When you were a kid, when the school day was over and you went home, there was a clear dividing line between school and home. And now, because of social media, I mean, my kids were born digital. Because of social media, there's no dividing line. If you have a child who's being bullied, they are bullied 24 hours a day everywhere they go.
No stopping it.
And
that's right.
There's magnitudes of cruelty that are possible now that weren't possible pre-internet. It is a different world, and in a different world, we have to play by different rules. So I agree with you. And also out west. So my older brother, when he was in high school, every pickup truck in that high school parking lot had a gun in the back because all these kids were hunters. I mean, of course they were hunters. Look where we lived. So here's what I think, because I've given this a lot of thought because you and Kevin had very similar, like a really similar upbringing in this way and similar parenting and corporal punishment and all of that. But both of you were securely attached to a parent or parents who you knew loved you, who kept you safe, who you felt safe with. When you got in trouble, you understood that you had done something that was wrong or had put you at risk. Because a lot of times, like, Kevin would get in trouble because he would do something dangerous, not realizing how dangerous it was, right? And that was probably true for you too.
Yes.
So the punishment coming from Doris, from your mom, you understood when parents say this hurts me more than it hurts you, you understood at some level that there was truth in that because you were loved. Yes. Now, put yourself in a different set of PF flyers. Put yourself in the family that me and my brothers were in. We weren't loved. And we weren't safe.
Different deal.
And there were no clear rules and boundaries. The abuse could be triggered by a cloud crossing the sun. So my feelings about corporal punishment are very different from yours and Kevin's.
Of course.
Because I grew up in a war zone. I grew up in a conflict zone. And nothing made sense. And I was a very good, very compliant child who was very, very good at making herself disappear. I could be in the room and you wouldn't know I was there. Because I understood that at any moment, the threat of violence could erupt and there were no boundaries on it. It wasn't go cut a switch and this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. There were times when it went so far out of control that I sometimes look back and I don't understand how, like, there wasn't a death. So when I became a parent, I brought all of that to it. And I was determined that my daughters would not feel the need to disappear in plain sight and that they wouldn't be scared of me, that I wouldn't be this unpredictable, unsafe, untrustworthy adult in their life who they just had to try to please because if they displease me, I'm on the attack. And it's important to always remember that all of us come from different places. When I see these,
Yes.
there was a period of time on Facebook, Maxim, because I came to Max about it. It was really upsetting for me. There was a period of time when people were posting a lot about, the good old days. If I'd have said that to my father, my teeth would have been on the floor. And a bunch of people are like, LOL, same. But in my family, teeth were on the floor for real. So it
Yeah.
wasn't funny. It wasn't funny to me. It was upsetting. And I came
Yeah.
to Max and I was like, Max, is it me? How do you feel about these people going, these kids today, if I did that, my teeth would be on the floor. And Max was also horrified.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah, it's just, it's a,
well, I guess the point that I'm making is, though, whatever the rules were 50 years ago in society, that's how everybody worked. But as time goes on, you reflect on what you did and you go, well, that didn't work all that great. Why don't we change that? And each year, each generation or each whatever, we do change and we try to change for the better.
yeah,
And at the time, if you were spanked in school, the generally parents would think, well, you probably deserved it.
Oh yes.
And
Yes.
I think that now people they look, they don't they're not as trusting of people who are working in schools. And I think with good reason. I think you have to
Yes.
be skeptical of all things, especially when it comes to your children, and to be able
Yep.
to look at them and say, okay, fine, I trust you to this point, but you're going to have to prove more to me. I'm not going to give you my blanket trust just because you've been hired by the school system and have been given this job.
At one time, that meant something. If you were hired by the school system, and because there was no scandalous. I mean,
Let me
but
tell
we've
you,
had so many.
scandalous things were happening. It just
Yes.
wasn't reported the way it is now.
We didn't
Teachers
know.
were sleeping. Listen, I know in my high school that there was a teacher who got caught with a girl, and what they did is they fired him. And that was it. And it was a scandal, but he wasn't arrested. He probably should have been.
Catholic school kid here, there was an instance where a teacher was sleeping with a girl. They fired him. The two of them got married, and as far as I know, they're still married. These things were happening. Yeah.
We had a girls basketball coach that as soon as one of his players graduated, they got married. I mean, they got married like the summer she graduated, and he still worked. And yeah, exactly. The thing is, I think that blind trust that people had 50 years ago in the system and in all those things, you thought that they stood for exactly what they say they stand for. We figured out that's not the case. So
Not
now,
all, many times,
not all,
not
many
but,
times,
and,
not all.
and I would say it's certainly the small minority of cases.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you have to now. You can't just blindly go, oh. You have to look, pay attention, see what's going on. I mean, you really do. Times change. We just have to change with the times. We can't still live in what we want to call the good old days, because we have to look at those days and judge them through the lens of that day. We can't judge them through the lens of this day. And, we're better than we were 50 years ago as a society, as far as how we're doing some things. So
The part about never being able to travel backward is everything. And we are in a very regressive moment culturally where people think the world is overwhelming. The technology has been weaponized to hijack our dopamine systems. We're all addicted.
Yep.
We're all addicted to the instant gratification of a swipe and a click. We just are. The science on it is
Yep.
really troubling. Like if you my husband's always telling me, woman, you got to get off social media. Well, baby love, this is my job. Like I agree with you that it's bad for all of us, but my job is a very technological job. It has messed with us. We don't have a shared collective reality. We don't have an agreement upon what's true and real. We don't share the same information sources. we're all like falling prey to rage bait and engagement bait. Our kids, our elderly parents are in this too. Like we're all in this together, and it's scary and it's exhausting and it's depressing. And I understand why people think the fix is to just go backward. But of course, time doesn't work that way. The only way to go is forward. And since we are not quite sure how to do that, we're going to do a weird ass, insane, regressive crackdown in the hopes of bringing us back to the so-called good old days, which weren't really all that good for people that weren't male or white or prosperous.
Yep.
So, and I'm a history nut. Like I'm obsessed. And believe me, I can tell you, I see things all the time in the past where we were better. We were more understanding of our neighbors. We were more open-minded to differences. But I can tell you all the ways that it was batshit worse too.
Yeah.
Because we're people, and as soon as you add people into the equation, you've got this wild card, unpredictable variable. I never raised a hand to my kids, and I did not allow any corporal punishment of them in school. It was never even a thing. Like it wasn't anything I had to ever deal with, and I'm thankful for that. But I'll tell you this: I'm at someone's house, and they have a 4-year-old. And the 4-year-old's being a 4-year-old. You think the terrible twos, try the fearsome fours.
Yeah.
Anybody that's raised kids can tell you 2-year-olds are chaos gremlins. 4-year-olds are plotting against you. They have the ability to plot against you. Yeah. And this kid was just being a 4-year-old. And the parent came at them with a raised hand. And I watched that child's face. And that child was so afraid in that moment, and started before the hand even got close. I mean, there was naked fear on that kid's face. And I thought, whatever I've done wrong, I've done so many things. I've made so many mistakes. I can tell you that neither of my kids have ever looked at me in fear. And as someone who only had fear on her face toward a parent, that is the greatest blessing. And not every parent using corporal punishment has a frightened kid on the other end. But we all know what it means when a kid is nakedly afraid, don't we?
Yep. Exactly right.
Yep. But you turned out
exactly
fine,
right.
Lamar.
Yeah.
You turned out pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was the weeding the garden or the picking a switch, but I have never known a man willing to go outside without being outside as much as you are willing to go outside without being outside.
Yeah. No, I got no complaints. I really, really don't. I've been fortunate. I have been fortunate.
You had such a good mama. Mm.
Yeah, I did. I still miss her today. Well, listen, we've had a great time. That's the end of another exciting episode. Thank y'all for listening. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Tell somebody about Talk Lamar podcast. I think they might appreciate it. I know I do. Also, check out this multiple award-winning and just won something else, True Weird Stuff podcast. I don't know what, we're going to have to build a whole new room just for the awards. I promise y'all will love it. It's really weird, but it's really good. And there's more to come on Talking Lamar, so don't quit now. I sure hate a quitter. So join us for the next episode. Go on the Bob and Sheri app. Look down at the bottom. Click on the microphone. We'd like to hear from you. Just start talking. We listen to every message. Y'all can also call 844-52-SHERI and leave it old school. Until then,